The sun dipped low over Ridgeton, painting the horizon in warm hues of orange and purple. The small town in the American Midwest was quiet, as it always was at dusk. But beneath the calm exterior, fear lingered. The Iron Claws, a notorious biker gang, had turned Ridgeton into their playground, preying on its residents and intimidating anyone who dared to stand against them. Eve Harper, a high school counselor, parked her old Subaru at Ray's gas station on the outskirts of town. She had spent her day visiting students who lived in the rural stretches beyond Ridgeton, checking in on families struggling with poverty and isolation. Her job was never easy, but Eve had an unshakable commitment to helping kids find their footing, even if it meant late nights and long drives. As she stepped out of the car, she noticed a student she recognized, a wiry boy named Tommy, pacing near the gas station's entrance. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he clutched a battered backpack. "Tommy," Eve called, her voice steady but concerned. He turned, startled, and glanced over his shoulder before rushing toward her. "Miss Harper, I need help," he stammered, his words spilling out in a panic. "They're after me. I didn't mean to get involved, but they said I had to deliver something, or they'd—" Before he could finish, the low rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. Eve's stomach tightened as she looked toward the road. 4 bikes roared into the station, their riders clad in black leather vests emblazoned with the Iron Claws insignia, a snarling wolf's head. The leader, Cal Wrecker Tyson, dismounted first. He was a tall, broad man with a menacing presence and a reputation for ruthlessness. Behind him, the other riders spread out, flanking him like predators closing in on their prey. Well, Wrecker drawled, his voice a mix of amusement and menace. "Looks like we've got a little meeting here. You trying to skip out on your deal, Tommy?" Eve stepped in front of the boy, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice firm. "He's just a kid." Wrecker's gaze shifted to her, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you supposed to be? His lawyer?" "She's nobody, boss," one of the bikers sneered. "Just some lady sticking her nose where it doesn't belong." Eve refused to back down. "He's not going with you," she said, her tone steady. "Whatever you think he owes you, you'll have to deal with me first." The bikers chuckled, but there was an edge of disbelief in their laughter. Few people in Ridgeton had the courage to stand up to the Iron Claws, and certainly not a young woman with no visible means of defense. Wrecker stepped closer, towering over her. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," he said. "But guts don't mean much out here. Step aside before you get hurt." Eve's mind raced. She had no way to physically challenge these men, but she knew someone who could. Her hand moved to her pocket, where her phone rested. Her father's number was at the top of her contacts. Jack Harper was a retired Marine, a man of few words but immense presence. Since moving back to Ridgeton after his military career, he had kept a low profile, content to spend his days fishing and tinkering with his truck. But Eve knew better than anyone that beneath his quiet demeanor lay a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer and had survived it. Before she could call, the roar of an approaching truck cut through the tension. A battered black pickup pulled into the station, its headlights sweeping over the scene. Jack stepped out, his movements calm and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying an understated authority. Wrecker turned, his expression shifting from amusement to annoyance. "Who the hell are you?" Jack's gaze swept over the bikers, assessing them with the practiced eye of a soldier. He noted their stances, the way they carried themselves, the concealed weapons poorly hidden beneath their jackets. "I'm the guy who's telling you to back off," Jack said, his voice steady but cold. Wrecker smirked, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "You think you're going to take us all on, old man?" Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his calm demeanor somehow more intimidating than any overt threat. When he spoke, his words were measured and deliberate. "I've spent my life dealing with men like you," he said. "Men who think strength is about making others afraid. Let me tell you something. Real strength isn't about fear. It's about protecting what matters. Now, you've got a choice. Walk away, or I'll make you wish you had." For a moment, no one moved. The bikers glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. Wrecker's bravado faltered under Jack's unwavering gaze. Finally, he sneered and took a step back. "This ain't over," he said, his voice filled with false confidence. "You'll regret sticking your nose in our business." Jack watched as the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared away into the night. Only when the sound of their engines faded did he turn to Eve and Tommy. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softening. Eve nodded, though her legs felt weak. "Thanks, Dad." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let's get him home," he said, nodding toward Tommy. As they drove through the quiet streets of Ridgeton, Eve couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Iron Claws wouldn't back down easily, but neither would her father. And in her heart, she knew the town of Ridgeton had a fight ahead of it, one that would test not just their courage, but their capacity for redemption. The next morning, the quiet hum of life in Ridgeton resumed, but a subtle tension hung in the air. Word of the confrontation at Ray's gas station spread quickly. The Iron Claws rarely retreated without exacting some form of retaliation, and the townsfolk knew their next move would likely be calculated and ruthless. Eve Harper sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open as she sipped coffee. Her father, Jack Harper, leaned against the counter, reading the local paper. The house, modest and lined with reminders of Jack's military career, was a sanctuary of calm, but Eve's mind buzzed with unease. "We need to talk about last night," Eve said, breaking the silence. Jack folded the paper neatly and set it aside. "All right, what's on your mind?" Eve hesitated before speaking. "They're not going to let this go, Dad. Wrecker's not the type to back down." Jack nodded. "I know." She studied his expression, calm and unreadable, a mask he'd perfected over decades of service. "You've dealt with people like this before," she continued. "What do you think they'll do next?" "They'll test us," Jack replied. "Find out if we're serious. Bullies like Wrecker only understand strength, and they think strength means control. But it doesn't have to." Eve frowned. "Then what do we do? Wait for them to escalate?" "No," Jack said, his tone firm. "We act first, but not how they expect." He crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Eve, you've got away with people. The work you do with those kids, that's real strength. If we're going to change this town, it won't just be me standing up to them. It'll be all of us. Together." Eve blinked, taken aback. Her father rarely spoke with such conviction about anything beyond their family. "What do you mean?" "We need the community," Jack explained. "If people see they don't have to live in fear, that they can stand up for themselves, it'll make it harder for the Iron Claws to keep their grip on this place." Eve nodded slowly. "You're talking about more than just fighting back?" "Exactly," Jack said. "We don't need to beat them with violence. We need to outsmart them, outlast them, and give the people of Ridgeton a reason to believe things can be different." That afternoon, Eve visited the high school where she worked. It was her day off, but she couldn't shake the image of Tommy's frightened face. She found him sitting alone on a bench near the football field, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. "Hey, Tommy," Eve said softly as she approached. The boy looked up, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Hi, Miss Harper." Eve sat beside him, leaving enough space to let him feel safe. "I wanted to check in on you. Are you okay?" Tommy shrugged, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I don't know. I guess. My mom's mad I got mixed up with them. She doesn't trust me anymore." Eve's heart ached for him. "Your mom's scared, Tommy. She just wants to keep you safe. And so do I." He nodded, but his shoulders remained slumped. "They're not going to leave me alone. Wrecker said he'd come after me if I didn't do what they wanted." "You're not alone in this," Eve assured him. "My dad and we're going to help. But you have to promise me you'll stay out of their way. No more running errands, no more meetings with them." Tommy hesitated before finally nodding. "I promise." Eve reached into her bag and pulled out a pamphlet she'd printed earlier. It listed resources for youth support and contact information for local counselors. "If you ever feel like you're in trouble, call me or one of the numbers on this list, okay?" Tommy took the pamphlet and managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Miss Harper." Meanwhile, Jack was busy laying the groundwork for his plan. He met with Sheriff Luke Miller, an old friend and one of the few people in Ridgeton willing to stand up to the Iron Claws. The sheriff's office was small, with worn furniture and stacks of paperwork cluttering the desk. Luke leaned back in his chair as Jack outlined his ideas. "So you're saying we need to turn the whole town against them," Luke said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Not against them," Jack clarified. "We need to show people there's a better way. Strength and unity, not fear. And I think it starts with the veterans." Luke raised an eyebrow. "The vets?" Jack nodded. "Ridgeton's got plenty of us. We've been through worse than a gang of bikers. If we can organize, we can give the rest of the town the confidence to stand up too." Luke leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I like the idea, Jack, but you know this isn't going to be easy. People are scared, and the Iron Claws have a long reach." "I know," Jack said, "but fear only works if no one pushes back." The sheriff exhaled deeply, then nodded. "All right, I'm in. Let's get the ball rolling." That evening, Jack and Eve hosted a small gathering at their house. Among the attendees were a few local business owners, veterans, and community leaders. The mood was cautious but hopeful as Jack explained his vision. "We're not here to fight them head-on," Jack said, addressing the group. "We're here to show them they can't control us, that we're stronger together." Eve chimed in, sharing her experiences with the students affected by the Iron Claw's influence. "This isn't just about stopping a gang. It's about giving people, especially the kids, hope. They need to see there's a way out, a way forward." The group discussed ideas: installing security cameras around town, organizing neighborhood watch groups, and providing support for at-risk youth. By the end of the night, the air was charged with a renewed sense of purpose. The seeds of change had been planted, and for the first time in years, the people of Ridgeton felt a glimmer of hope. As the last guest left, Eve turned to her father. "Do you really think this will work?" Jack's gaze was steady. "It's going to take time, but I believe in this town, and I believe in us." Outside, the night was quiet, but the resolve of Ridgeton's residents was anything but. The Iron Claws had ruled through fear for too long, but now the tide was beginning to turn. The following days in Ridgeton were marked by quiet preparations. The town had always been tight-knit, but the recent events at Ray's gas station stirred something deeper, a collective determination to reclaim their community from fear. Jack Harper and his daughter Eve worked tirelessly to organize the initial steps of their plan, recruiting volunteers, training watch groups, and rallying support from local businesses. Despite their efforts, the Iron Claws were far from idle. Cal, Wrecker, Tyson, furious over the public humiliation at the gas station, began plotting his retaliation. His second-in-command, David "Shades" Carson, watched with increasing unease as Wrecker's tactics grew more aggressive. "They're just a bunch of scared sheep," Wrecker snarled during a meeting at the gang's clubhouse. The space was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and anger. "All we need to do is remind them who's in charge." Shades leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Boss, maybe we're pushing this too far. Jack Harper's no ordinary guy. He's got experience, military experience. That wasn't some fluke at the gas station." Wrecker shot him a glare. "You going soft on me, Shades?" "No," Shades replied, his tone calm but firm. "I'm saying we should think this through. If we escalate too much, we'll have the whole town against us, and maybe worse." Wrecker waved him off. "The town's already afraid. That's our leverage. Now get your head straight, or I'll find someone who can." Shades said nothing, but the tension between them lingered as Wrecker barked orders for the gang to regroup and prepare for a show of force. Meanwhile, Jack and Eve finalized their plans for the first neighborhood watch meeting, which would include a self-defense workshop for volunteers. Jack had invited several local veterans to help teach basic safety techniques and strategies for de-escalation. The meeting was held in the town hall, a modest building that quickly filled with residents. Nervous murmurs filled the room as people exchanged worried glances, but there was also a sense of cautious optimism. Jack stood at the front, his steady gaze sweeping over the crowd. He began speaking with the quiet confidence that came naturally to him. "I know what you're all feeling," he said. "Fear, uncertainty. You've seen what the Iron Claws can do, and it's easy to believe they're unstoppable. But I'm here to tell you, they're not." The room fell silent. They've controlled this town through fear, but fear only works if we let it, Jack continued. The truth is, we're stronger together. If we stand united, we can take back Ridgeton, not with violence, but with courage, preparation, and community. He gestured to the veterans standing beside him. These men and women know what it means to face challenges and overcome them. They've agreed to share their knowledge with you. Tonight, we'll start with the basics: how to stay safe, how to watch out for each other, and how to show the iron claws that we're not afraid anymore. The workshop began with practical demonstrations. Jack taught techniques for defusing confrontations, while the veterans shared tips on staying vigilant and protecting vulnerable areas like schools and businesses. Eve facilitated discussions, encouraging residents to share their concerns and brainstorm solutions. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted. People who had arrived wary and hesitant left with a renewed sense of purpose. As Jack and Eve packed up the remaining materials, Eve turned to her father with a small smile. "You're a natural at this," she said. Jack chuckled. "Years of training. It's good to put it to use for something that matters." "It's working, Dad," Eve said. "People are starting to believe in themselves again." A week later, Wrecker made his move. Late one night, the Iron Claws descended on Jack's property, their motorcycles rumbling like a storm as they approached. Jack had anticipated this and had taken precautions. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating the area as the bikers pulled into the driveway. Jack stepped onto his porch, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the sight of 8 men glaring up at him. "Evening, gentlemen," Jack called out. Wrecker dismounted his bike, swaggering forward. "You think you're smart, old man? Think you can play hero and turn this town against us?" Jack didn't flinch. "I think this town's had enough of your games. You're not welcome here anymore." Wrecker's lips curled into a sneer. "You're playing a dangerous game. You think your lights and your little meetings will stop us? We'll burn this place down before we let you take what's ours." Jack tilted his head slightly, his gaze piercing. "And what exactly is yours, Wrecker? Fear? Intimidation? Those aren't strength, they're desperation. And that's why you're going to lose." For a moment, the 2 men stared each other down, the tension crackling like static in the air. Then Wrecker signaled to his men. "Teach him a lesson," he barked. As the bikers advanced, Jack calmly pressed a button on a remote in his hand. High-pitched alarms blared from strategically placed devices around the property, and hidden sprinklers erupted, spraying the bikers with foul-smelling dye. Floodlights began strobing, disorienting the men. From the tree-line, a group of veterans emerged, armed only with flashlights and loudspeakers. "Time to go home, boys," one of the veterans called. The Iron Claws, now drenched and humiliated, stumbled back to their bikes. Wrecker's face burned with rage as he barked at his men to retreat. "This isn't over, Harper," he shouted before roaring off into the night. The next morning, Jack and Eve inspected the aftermath of the gang's failed intimidation attempt. Despite the mess, Jack seemed calm. "They'll come back," Eve said. Jack nodded. "Probably. But now they know we're ready for them." Later that day, Shades approached Jack at the local diner, where he sat quietly sipping coffee. Shades glanced around nervously before taking a seat across from him. "Brave of you to show your face here," Jack said without looking up. Shades sighed. "I'm not here to fight, Harper. I'm here to talk." Jack set his cup down and met Shades' gaze. "Then talk?" "You're right," Shades admitted. "Wrecker's losing it. He's pushing us too far, and some of us, we're not sure we can follow him anymore." Jack leaned back, his expression unreadable. "So what do you want from me?" "I don't know," Shades said, his voice heavy with frustration. "But I know this. What you're doing is making people think. Maybe even me." Jack studied the younger man for a moment before nodding. "If you're serious about wanting out, there's a way. But it's not easy." Shades hesitated, then nodded. "I'll think about it." As Shades left, Jack returned to his coffee, his mind already working through the possibilities. The line had been drawn, but cracks were beginning to show, and Jack intended to exploit them. Ridgeton's fight was far from over, but for the first time, the balance was shifting. The morning sun rose over Ridgeton, casting a golden glow over the small town that was slowly beginning to find its voice. Jack Harper leaned against his truck in the driveway, watching as a group of volunteers gathered outside the community center. The neighborhood watch was gaining momentum, with more residents joining each day. "Morning, Dad," Eve called out as she walked up the gravel path toward him. She carried a clipboard filled with notes and sign-up sheets. "The turnout's better than I expected." Jack nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the group. "People are starting to believe they can make a difference. That's the first step." Among the group was Tommy, the teenager whose encounter with the Iron Claws had sparked this chain of events. He stood with his mother, who had finally agreed to let him attend the workshops after seeing the changes in the community. "You think he'll be okay?" Eve asked, nodding toward Tommy. Jack followed her gaze. "He's got a long road ahead, but he's here. That's what matters." At the Iron Claws clubhouse on the edge of town, Wrecker's frustration boiled over. His crew sat around a grimy table, the tension palpable as he paced back and forth. "This town's getting too bold," Wrecker growled. "That Harper guy's got everyone thinking they can stand up to us. We need to remind them who's in charge." Shades, seated at the edge of the room, spoke cautiously. "Wrecker, we've already lost control of the streets. People aren't scared like they used to be. Maybe it's time we—" "Time we what?" Wrecker snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "Give up? Hand over everything we built because some old man and his daughter held a few meetings?" Shade sighed, knowing any further argument would fall on deaf ears. Wrecker's pride wouldn't allow him to see reason. "We hit them where it hurts," Wrecker continued, a dark gleam in his eye. "If Harper wants to play hero, let's see how he handles a real crisis." That evening, Jack and Eve hosted another meeting, this time focusing on strategies for dealing with potential retaliation. The atmosphere in the community center was tense but resolute as residents discussed how to protect their families and businesses. "We've made progress," Jack said, addressing the crowd, "but we can't let our guard down. The Iron Claws aren't going to walk away quietly." Eve stepped forward, holding up a map of the town. "We've identified key areas where we need more coverage: schools, grocery stores, and other public spaces. If we can keep those areas secure, it'll make it harder for the gang to intimidate people." As the group broke into smaller discussions, Shades appeared at the doorway, his leather jacket zipped up against the cool night air. He lingered for a moment, hesitant, before stepping inside. The room fell silent as people turned to look at him. "Shades," Jack said evenly. "Didn't expect to see you here." Shades shoved his hands into his pockets, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. "I need to talk to you, Harper. Privately." Jack nodded and led Shades to a quiet corner. "What's on your mind?" Shades hesitated, his usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. "Wrecker's planning something big. He's not going to let this slide." Jack's expression hardened. "What kind of plan?" "Don't know all the details," Shades admitted. "But he's got some of the guys riled up, talking about making an example out of someone. I'm not okay with it, but I don't know how to stop him." Jack studied the younger man for a moment before replying. "You can't stop him alone, but you can help us be ready." Shades exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't sign up for this, Harper. I thought the Iron Claws were about brotherhood, not terrorizing towns." "You have a choice," Jack said firmly. "You can walk away from this now, or you can keep letting him drag you down. But if you want to do the right thing, we'll help you." Shades nodded reluctantly. "I'll think about it." 2 nights later, the Iron Claws struck. A small diner on the edge of town, one of the first businesses to join the neighborhood watch, was their target. Wrecker and a handful of his men vandalized the exterior, smashing windows and spray-painting threats on the walls. The attack was over in minutes, but the message was clear. The gang wasn't going to relinquish their hold on Ridgeton without a fight. Jack arrived at the scene shortly after the sheriff, taking in the shattered glass and the shaken faces of the diner's owners. "They didn't hurt anyone," Luke Miller said, his voice grim, "but they wanted to scare people. Make them think twice about standing up." Jack nodded, his jaw set. "It won't work. They're desperate, and everyone can see it." The next day, the community rallied to repair the damage. Volunteers arrived with tools and supplies, boarding up windows and scrubbing the graffiti off the walls. "This is what they're afraid of," Eve said as she helped paint over the last traces of the vandalism. "They know they're losing control." Tommy and a group of teenagers from the high school joined in, their energy infectious as they worked alongside the adults. For the first time, it felt like the town was truly united. Shades watched from a distance, leaning against his motorcycle. The sight of the community standing together stirred something in him, a mix of guilt and longing. As the work wrapped up, Jack approached him. "You made a decision yet?" Shades nodded slowly. "I'm in, but if Wrecker finds out I'm helping you, we'll handle it," Jack assured him. "You just focus on doing the right thing." That night, Shades met Jack and Eve at their house, providing details about the Iron Claw's operations. He revealed the locations of their hideouts, their methods of intimidation, and the names of members who might be open to leaving the gang. "This isn't going to be easy," Shades warned. "Some of these guys are loyal to Wrecker no matter what. But there are others, like me, who've had enough." Jack nodded. "We'll reach them, one step at a time." Eve leaned forward, her voice steady. "This is about more than just breaking up a gang. It's about giving people a way out, a chance to choose something better." Shades met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. "Then let's do it." The fight for Ridgeton was far from over, but the cracks in the Iron Claw's foundation were growing. With Shades' help and the community standing strong, Jack and Eve knew they were closer than ever to breaking the chains of fear that had held their town captive for so long. The morning after the diner attack, Ridgeton buzzed with activity. Jack Harper and Eve were up early, finalizing plans for the next stage of their efforts. The town's resolve had been tested, but instead of retreating into fear, the community had responded with resilience. At the community center, a new group of volunteers gathered, including several familiar faces, local business owners, high school teachers, and even a few veterans who had initially been hesitant to get involved. Among them was Tommy, standing proudly next to his mother. "Morning, everyone," Jack greeted, his calm authority commanding the room's attention. "Last night showed us something important. The Iron Claws want us to believe they still have control, but their attack was a sign of desperation, and we're going to make sure it's their last." Eve stepped forward with a clipboard. "We're expanding our efforts," she said, her voice steady. "More neighborhood watch groups, better coordination between businesses, and a new focus on outreach to those still caught up with the gang." Shades, now fully committed to helping the Harpers, leaned against the back wall, listening closely. He'd seen firsthand how fractured the Iron Claws had become, and he knew the time was right to make a decisive move. Later that day, Jack and Shades drove out to a quiet patch of farmland where another former gang member, Travis "Hawk" Miller, had been laying low. Hawk had been part of the Iron Claws for years, but had grown disillusioned with Wrecker's increasingly volatile leadership. As they approached the small house, Hawk stepped onto the porch, his wary eyes narrowing as he recognized Shades. "What are you doing here?" Hawk asked, his tone guarded. "Relax, Hawk," Shades said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble. We need to talk." Jack stepped forward, his presence immediately calming the tension. "I'm Jack Harper. I think we can help each other." Hawk studied them for a moment before nodding and gesturing for them to come inside. Over coffee at the worn kitchen table, Jack laid out the plan. "We're not just fighting the Iron Claws. We're building something stronger, a community that doesn't need to live in fear. But we can't do it alone. We need people like you." Hawk frowned. "People like me? I'm not exactly a role model." "You are if you choose to be," Jack said. "You know the gang's weaknesses, their tactics. If you're willing to help, we can use that knowledge to protect this town and give others a way out." Hawk hesitated, his gaze shifting to Shades. "And you? You really think this is the answer?" Shades nodded. "I've seen enough to know Wrecker's going to destroy himself and anyone who stays with him. This is our chance to do something better." After a long pause, Hawk sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "All right, I'm in, but I'm not making any promises." "That's all we ask," Jack said, extending a hand. Hawk shook it, the first spark of hope igniting in his eyes. Back in town, Eve was working on an outreach program aimed at the younger members of the Iron Claws. She knew that many of them, like Tommy, had been drawn into the gang out of desperation or a lack of better options. She coordinated with local schools, churches, and youth organizations to create safe spaces for kids to talk, learn, and grow. The program included mentorship opportunities, job training, and recreational activities designed to build confidence and community. One afternoon, she met with a small group of teenagers at the high school gym. Among them was a boy named Daryl, who had been running errands for the Iron Claws but hadn't fully committed to the gang. "You've got a choice, Daryl," Eve told him, her tone gentle but firm. "You don't have to follow their path. There's a better way, and we're here to help you find it." Daryl looked at her skeptically. "They're not going to just let me walk away. They don't get to decide your future," Eve said. "You do." For the first time, Daryl seemed to consider her words. Meanwhile, Wrecker was growing increasingly paranoid. The gang's failed attack on the diner had emboldened the town, and the growing number of defectors left him feeling isolated. At the clubhouse, Wrecker slammed his fist on the table, glaring at the few loyal members still sitting with him. "We're losing control," he snarled. "Harper's turned the town against us, and now even our own guys are bailing. Maybe we need to cut our losses," one of the bikers suggested cautiously. Wrecker rounded on him, his eyes blazing. "Cut our losses? You think I've spent years building this crew just to let some washed-up vet and his brat take it all away?" Shade's absence hadn't gone unnoticed, and Wrecker was beginning to suspect the worst. "Find him," Wrecker ordered. "And when you do, make an example out of him." Back at the community center, Jack, Eve, and Shades met with Sheriff Miller to discuss their next steps. Hawk had provided valuable intel on the gang's operations, and the time had come to use it. "We've identified their storage site," Shades explained, pointing to a map on the table. "It's where they keep their bikes, weapons, and supplies. If we hit it, it'll cripple their ability to intimidate the town." The sheriff frowned. "You're talking about taking direct action. That's risky." "We're not going in guns blazing," Jack assured him. "This is about strategy. If we expose what they're doing and get the evidence to the authorities, it'll force Wrecker's hand and give us more leverage with the guys on the fence." Luke nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we need to do this by the book. No cutting corners." Eve glanced at her father. "And what if Wrecker retaliates?" "He will," Jack said. "But this time, we'll be ready." The operation was planned for the following night. A small team, including Jack, Shades, and Hawk, would infiltrate the storage site and gather evidence while the sheriff's deputies stood by to make arrests. As the sun set, the group met at a secluded spot on the outskirts of town. Jack reviewed the plan one last time, his voice calm and steady. "This isn't about taking them down with violence," he reminded them. "It's about showing them their time is up." Shades nodded, gripping the flashlight in his hand. "Let's do this." The team moved quickly and quietly, slipping through the shadows toward the storage site. Hawk led the way, his knowledge of the gang's routines proving invaluable. Inside the warehouse, they found rows of motorcycles, crates of stolen goods, and weapons hidden under tarps. Jack and Shades took photos while Hawk kept watch. They were almost finished when a faint sound made Jack freeze. "Voices." "Move," Jack whispered. The group slipped out the back just as a pair of bikers entered the building. Minutes later, they met with the sheriff and handed over the evidence. "It's enough," Luke confirmed, his eyes scanning the photos. "We'll move in tonight." As the team disbanded, Jack turned to Shades and Hawk. "You both did good tonight." Hawk smirked. "Feels strange doing something that doesn't involve breaking the law." "You'll get used to it," Jack said with a rare smile. The tide was turning, but Jack knew the fight was far from over. Wrecker wouldn't go quietly, and the town's newfound unity would be tested in the days to come. But for now, they had struck a decisive blow, and Ridgeton was one step closer to freedom. The success of the operation against the Iron Claws storage site sent ripples through Ridgeton. For the first time in years, the gang was on the defensive. The evidence Jack Harper and his team gathered had led to a swift police raid, resulting in several arrests and the confiscation of stolen goods and weapons. But victory came with a price. Wrecker's fury was palpable, and his remaining loyalists were desperate to retaliate. Jack stood in the living room of his home, reviewing a map of the town with Sheriff Miller, Eve, Shades, and Hawk. The atmosphere was tense as they discussed the aftermath of the raid. "This was a major blow to Wrecker," Luke said, pointing to the location of the raided warehouse. "But he's not done. If anything, this will make him more dangerous." He'll want to reassert control, Jack said. And he's running out of time. That makes him unpredictable. Eve leaned forward, her expression resolute. We need to focus on protecting the community. If Wrecker tries to escalate, we'll be ready. Shades nodded in agreement. He's going to lash out. Probably something big. But I know some of the guys who are still with him. They're not loyal, just scared. If we can get through to them, it'll weaken him even more. Then we focus on outreach, Jack decided. Every defection counts. And we double down on securing key areas around town. Over the next few days, the Harpers and their allies worked tirelessly to fortify Ridgeton's defenses. Neighborhood watch groups expanded their patrols, local businesses implemented security measures, and volunteers set up safe zones for residents. Eve spearheaded efforts to engage with at-risk youth, working closely with schools and churches to provide alternatives to gang involvement. Her meetings with teenagers like Daryl were beginning to bear fruit. You really think they'll just let us walk away? Daryl asked during one session, his voice tinged with doubt. They don't have a choice if you stand with us, Eve replied firmly. It's about strength in numbers. The more people who choose a better path, the weaker they become. Daryl hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I'll try. Meanwhile, Wrecker was spiraling. At the Iron Claws clubhouse, he paced like a caged animal, barking orders at his dwindling crew. Only a handful of loyalists remained, their numbers further thinned by defections. They think they can take us down, Wrecker growled, slamming a fist on the table. But this town belongs to us. Shade's absence was a sore point, his betrayal stinging more than Wrecker was willing to admit. And now Hawk's defection only added to the tension. We need to hit them hard, Wrecker continued. Show them what happens when they cross us. His remaining men exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence in their leader clearly waning. What's the plan, boss? One of them asked. We're going to remind them who we are, Wrecker snarled. No more games. That night, the Iron Claws launched their boldest attack yet. Under the cover of darkness, they set fire to a storage barn on the edge of town that belonged to a local farmer who had openly supported the Harpers' efforts. The blaze lit up the night sky, drawing firefighters and residents to the scene. Jack, Eve, and Shades arrived minutes later, joining the crowd that had gathered to watch the flames consume the structure. This is Wrecker's message, Shades said grimly. Jack's jaw tightened as he surveyed the destruction. He's desperate. That means we're getting close. Eve stepped forward, addressing the crowd. This is exactly what the Iron Claws want, to scare us into backing down. But we're not going to let them win. This community is stronger than their intimidation. Her words struck a chord, and the crowd began to rally around the farmer, offering help to rebuild. As the fire was extinguished, Jack turned to Sheriff Miller. We need to force Wrecker's hand. Make him show his true colors to the people who are still following him. The next day, the Harpers and their allies set their plan into motion. Hawk used his connections to spread a message through the Iron Claws network, inviting those still loyal to Wrecker to meet at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The goal was to confront Wrecker in a controlled setting, with the police nearby to ensure no one got hurt. You sure about this? Shades asked as they prepared for the meeting. No, Jack admitted, but we don't have many options left. If we can get through to the ones who are still on the fence, we might have a chance to end this without more violence. That evening, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with tension as Wrecker and his crew arrived. Hawk and Shades were already there, along with a few other former members of the gang who had defected. Wrecker strode into the room, his posture radiating anger. What's this about? He demanded. It's over, Wrecker, Hawk said evenly. You're losing control, and you know it. It's time to let this go. Wrecker laughed bitterly. You think a bunch of traitors and cowards can tell me what to do? This is my crew. My town. It's not your town anymore, Jack said, stepping out of the shadows. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to Wrecker's fury. The people of Ridgeton are taking it back. Wrecker's eyes narrowed as he sized Jack up. You think you're some kind of savior? You don't know what it takes to lead. I know what it takes to protect, Jack replied. And that's what we're doing, protecting this town from people like you. The confrontation escalated as Wrecker's men began to voice their doubts. Some stood by him, but others wavered, their loyalty shaken by the Harpers' efforts. You don't have to follow him, Shades said, addressing the group. You can walk away. There's a better way. Wrecker's anger boiled over, and he reached for the knife at his belt. But before he could act, the warehouse doors burst open, and Sheriff Miller and his deputies entered, weapons drawn. It's over, Wrecker, Luke announced. Drop the knife. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Wrecker let the knife fall to the floor, his defiance giving way to resignation. As the deputies took Wrecker into custody, the remaining gang members exchanged glances, some following their leader out while others stayed behind. Jack stepped forward, addressing those who remained. You've seen what happens when fear and violence control your life. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can choose something better, right here, right now. Hawk and Shade stood beside him, their presence a testament to the possibility of change. Slowly, one by one, the remaining gang members nodded. Back in town, the news of Wrecker's arrest spread quickly, bringing a renewed sense of hope to Ridgeton. The Harpers knew the fight wasn't over, but they had taken a major step toward reclaiming their community. That night, as the town gathered at the community center to celebrate their progress, Jack looked out at the crowd and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Unity. This is what strength looks like, he said quietly to Eve. Not fear, not violence, this. And for the first time in years, Ridgeton felt like home again. The arrest of Wrecker sent shockwaves through Ridgeton. For the first time in years, the Iron Claws were leaderless, their grip on the town fractured beyond repair. The news brought a mixture of relief and uncertainty. While some celebrated, others worried about what might come next. Jack Harper, Eve, and their allies wasted no time. They knew the power vacuum left by Wrecker's downfall could either destabilize the town further or serve as the foundation for lasting change. This is the moment we've been working toward, Jack said during a meeting at the community center. The room was packed with residents, local leaders, and former gang members who had joined their cause. We've taken a major step forward, but we can't let our guard down. The Iron Claws aren't gone, and there's still work to do. Eve stood beside him, holding a clipboard filled with action plans. This is our opportunity to rebuild, not just businesses or neighborhoods, but trust. We need to keep engaging with the community and ensure everyone feels safe and included. The first step was outreach to the remaining members of the Iron Claws. Many of them, especially the younger recruits, had joined out of desperation or a lack of options. With Wrecker gone, some were ready to walk away, but others were hesitant, fearing retaliation from rival gangs or retribution from the law. Shades and Hawk took the lead on this effort. Having been in the gang themselves, they knew how to approach these individuals and offer them a way out. One afternoon, they met with a small group of former Claws at a diner on the edge of town. The atmosphere was tense, but Shades broke the ice with his usual bluntness. Look, he said, leaning forward across the table. We've all made mistakes, but you don't have to keep making them. There's a better way, and we're here to help you find it. One of the younger men, a wiry kid named Kenny, looked skeptical. You think the town's just gonna forgive us? After everything we've done? They're not going to forget, Hawk admitted. But forgiveness is different. It's earned, and it starts with taking responsibility. Shades nodded. You don't have to do this alone. We've been where you are, and we'll stand with you. But it's your choice. After a long pause, Kenny nodded. I'll try. While Shades and Hawk focused on outreach, Eve worked on expanding the town's support systems. She collaborated with schools, local businesses, and churches to create programs for at-risk youth and provide resources for former gang members looking to turn their lives around. One of her most successful initiatives was a mentorship program pairing reformed gang members with teenagers who were struggling to find their way. Daryl, who had been on the edge of joining the Iron Claws, was one of the first participants. I don't know if this is gonna work, Daryl admitted during his first meeting with his mentor, a former Claw named Marcus. It's not about being perfect, Marcus replied. It's about trying. And trust me, the effort's worth it. Over time, Daryl began to open up, sharing his dreams of becoming a mechanic. Marcus used his own experience in the gang's illegal chop shop to teach Daryl legitimate skills, showing him a path forward. As progress continued, the Harpers faced resistance from unexpected places. Some residents were unwilling to forgive, insisting that the former gang members didn't deserve a second chance. At a town hall meeting, tensions boiled over when a business owner, Mr. Logan, stood up to voice his concerns. "These people terrorized us for years," Logan said angrily. "Now we're supposed to just welcome them back with open arms? What happens when they go back to their old ways?" Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Logan, but this isn't about excusing what they've done. It's about giving them an opportunity to change and making our community stronger in the process." Eve added, "If we don't offer them a way out, we're just leaving the door open for another gang to take Wrecker's place. This is about breaking the cycle." The room buzzed with murmurs, but the Harpers' argument began to sway some opinions. Meanwhile, Sheriff Miller focused on securing the town against external threats. With the Iron Claws in disarray, rival gangs from neighboring areas saw an opportunity to expand their influence. During a late-night patrol, the sheriff and his deputies intercepted a group of bikers attempting to move into Ridgeton. The confrontation ended peacefully, but it was a stark reminder that the fight wasn't over. "We're holding the line," Luke told Jack the next morning, "but we need the community to stay united. If we falter, it'll send the wrong message." Jack nodded. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen." In the weeks that followed, Ridgeton began to heal. The Harpers' efforts were paying off as more former gang members chose to join the rebuilding process. The mentorship program flourished, local businesses hired reformed claws, and youth outreach initiatives saw record participation. One evening, as Jack and Eve walked through the town square, they saw signs of transformation everywhere. Families strolled down the street without fear. Teenagers played basketball in a newly refurbished park, and the diner that had been vandalized by the Iron Claws now bustled with activity. "This is what we've been fighting for," Eve said, a smile spreading across her face. Jack nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and determination. "It's a start, but there's still more to do." Despite the progress, Wrecker's absence left a lingering shadow. His arrest had disrupted the Iron Claws, but some loyalists still clung to the remnants of the gang, unwilling to let go of their old ways. One night, Jack received a call from Shades. "Wrecker's making noise from jail," Shades said. "Some of the guys who didn't get picked up in the raid are talking about trying to bust him out." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "Do they have the means to pull it off?" "Not sure," Shades admitted. "But if they try, it could undo everything we've worked for." Jack's mind raced. "We need to shut this down before it starts." The Harpers, along with Sheriff Miller and their allies, began gathering intel on the remaining loyalists. Using information from Shades and Hawk, they identified the leaders of the group and tracked their movements. At the same time, Eve ramped up community outreach, emphasizing the importance of unity and vigilance. "This is our town," she told a group of volunteers. "We've come too far to let anyone drag us back into the darkness." As the community rallied together, Jack prepared for what he knew would be one of their toughest challenges yet. "We've broken the Iron Claws," he told Eve one night. "But to truly secure Ridgeton's future, we have to deal with the last of them, once and for all." Eve nodded, her resolve as strong as her father's. "Then let's finish this." The final remnants of the Iron Claws clung to the shadows, desperate to hold on to what little power they had left. Jack Harper, Eve, and their allies knew the gang's loyalists were planning something bold, a last-ditch effort to free Wrecker from jail and reignite their reign of terror. Jack stood in the community center late one evening, a map of Ridgeton spread across the table. Sheriff Miller, Shades, Hawk, and Eve surrounded him. "They're desperate," Jack said, his tone measured. "Desperate people make dangerous choices. We need to stay ahead of them." "They're planning something big," Shades added. "My contacts say they're trying to recruit outside help, probably from neighboring gangs." Sheriff Miller nodded. "If they manage to pull this off, we're looking at chaos, not just in Ridgeton but across the county." Eve leaned forward, her eyes sharp with determination. "Then we stop them. We've come too far to let them drag us back." For days, the group worked tirelessly to track the Loyalists' movements. They discovered plans for a coordinated jailbreak, involving a convoy of bikers to ambush the transport vehicle moving Wrecker to a state penitentiary. "This is it," Jack said during a late-night strategy meeting. "Their last stand. If we can stop this, We'll dismantle what's left of the Iron Claws for good. The group devised a counterplan, working with Sheriff Miller and his deputies to intercept the convoy. Shades and Hawk, with their insider knowledge of the gang's tactics, played a critical role in anticipating their moves. We'll hit them where they least expect it, Hawk said, tracing a route on the map. If we catch them here, they'll have nowhere to go. The day of the planned ambush arrived, the tension palpable as law enforcement and community volunteers prepared to execute their counterplan. Jack and Eve joined Shades and Hawk at a vantage point near the convoy's route. Sheriff Miller coordinated his deputies, ensuring every possible escape route was covered. "This is it," Eve said, checking her radio. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've done everything we can to prepare. Now we finish this." As the convoy approached, the Iron Claws loyalists emerged, their motorcycles roaring like thunder as they sped toward their target. The ambush began with the gang blocking the road, their weapons drawn as they prepared to overwhelm the transport team. But Jack and his allies were ready. Sheriff Miller's deputies moved swiftly, setting up barricades to cut off the gang's escape. Shades and Hawk, disguised as gang members, infiltrated the convoy and worked from within to disrupt their plans. When the gang realized they'd walked into a trap, chaos erupted. Jack and Eve coordinated with law enforcement, ensuring the confrontation remained controlled. Jack focused on neutralizing threats with precision, using his military training to defuse situations before they escalated. Eve worked alongside community volunteers, ensuring civilians in the area were safe and providing support to law enforcement. In the middle of the fray, Shades confronted one of the gang's ringleaders, a man named Cole, who had been Wrecker's right-hand man. "This is over, Cole," Shades said, blocking his path. "You don't have to go down with this sinking ship." Cole sneered. "You think turning on us makes you better? You're just as bad as the rest of us." "No," Shades replied, his voice steady. "I chose to change. You can, too. But it starts with letting this go." After a tense moment, Cole dropped his weapon, signaling his surrender. The operation ended with minimal violence, thanks to the Harpers' meticulous planning. The remaining loyalists were arrested, their vehicles impounded, and Wrecker's transport proceeded without further interference. As the dust settled, Sheriff Miller approached Jack, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "You did it," Miller said. "This town owes you more than we can ever repay." Jack shook his head. "This wasn't about me. It was about all of us." Ridgeton fought back together. In the days that followed, the town came together to celebrate their hard-won victory. The Harpers worked tirelessly to ensure the momentum they'd built continued to grow. The mentorship program expanded, with more former gang members like Shades and Hawk stepping up to guide at-risk youth. Local businesses opened their doors to provide jobs and training, giving the community's most vulnerable members a chance to build better lives. Daryl, one of Eve's mints, now worked part-time at Marcus's auto shop while attending school. "Feels good to be doing something real," he told Eve one afternoon. "Thanks for not giving up on me." Eve smiled. "You did the work, Daryl. We're just here to help you along the way." At a town hall meeting, Jack and Eve addressed the community, reflecting on their journey and outlining their vision for Ridgeton's future. "We've proven that change is possible," Jack said, "but this is just the beginning. Together, we can make sure Ridgeton is a place where everyone feels safe and valued." Eve added, "This town has shown incredible strength. Now it's time to channel that strength into rebuilding, not just buildings, but lives." The room erupted in applause, the community's unity stronger than ever. One evening, as Jack and Eve walked through the town square, they stopped in front of a newly erected mural honoring Ridgeton's transformation. The artwork depicted scenes of the community working together, a testament to the resilience and determination that had carried them through their darkest days. "This is what real strength looks like," Jack said, his voice filled with pride. "Not fear, not violence, but people standing together." Eve nodded, her heart swelling with hope. "We've come a long way, and we're not done yet." As the sun set over Ridgeton, the town's lights shone brightly, a beacon of hope and renewal. Jack and Eve stood together, watching as families strolled through the square, children played in the park, and businesses bustled with activity. For the first time in years, Ridgeton felt truly alive. The Harpers knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but they were ready to face them, together with their community. Because in Ridgeton, they had proven that even in the face of darkness, the light of hope could prevail. And that was only the beginning.